Oh, you're gonna have to take this into the shop.
Who's speaking?
It's your conscience. We don't talk a lot these days.
Happy holidays, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letterman D. Happy holidays, Drea.
Happy holidays, Brian.
If you are celebrating Christmas, which this episode is dropping on, we hope you are having a fantastic day with your family, your friends. We hope that we may even be able to help you get through that long day of cooking for those family and friends as you listen to what is going to be I think maybe a raucous episode of this,
I'm so
this
ready.
podcast.
And in fact, Brian, I would like to open the show with a Christmas poem.
Oh, okay.
And if you recall, last year, I opened the holiday show with a Batman-centered holiday poem.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember it.
Okay.
Like it was a year ago.
You do. Well, here goes. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and dark in Stark Tower. The Avengers were stirring over international power. The government had inventoried all of their waste and found that these heroes murdered a many in haste. Tony was ready to sign the accords, while Cap, Falcon, and Wanda held true to their words. To register our heroes as a violation of liberties, like internments and denied rights in much of our histories. They met in an airport, a deserted parking lot, to work out their divisions and settle the plot. On Ant-Man, on Vision, on Spider-Man and Samster, on Tony, on Bucky, on Cap, and Black Panther. I couldn't find. Yeah.
No, it was good. It was good. That was good.
As the dust settles, bonds strain, become thinner. In a civil war, there are no winners.
Wow. You wrote that.
I did.
Nicely done. I'm sure I was equally impressed last year, and I'm guessing I'm going to be equally impressed next year. But that was great.
I thought I would open the Civil War show with a poem that was fitting. Not necessarily a happy poem, but at least one that sets the tone for our conversation.
Well, judging from that poem, I think I might have a clue as to whose side you might be on.
What?
But
wait, I know.
We're gonna hold that because I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait to ask you about sides till the end, till we wrap up this conversation.
Okay.
But what I am interested in is the fact that you just this past year, for the very first time, you read Marvel's Civil War comics.
Yes, it was right after our show about Captain America. I think the first Captain America film. Our good friend David Nett lent me the collection of the Civil War comics.
These were, of course, the comics from 2006, 2007, Mark Millar and Steve McNiven. And then you also read, in addition to that, one of the Spider-Man tie-ins.
Straczynski's One More Day.
Yeah. So now, having a little bit of context for where some of this story came from, tell us a little bit about your experience reading the Civil War comic.
I definitely recommend that people read it because there are higher stakes in the comics. There are moments of great divide and loss and setbacks that I think for comics, it can make a lot of sense because the media is vast and there's lots of opportunities to rectify, if not completely retcon things. But I'd say the comics, I definitely say it's worth reading. even if you know the movie Civil War, because there are huge differences in the comics.
Yeah.
But I'd say that the plot is, very, very similar, and you have in the comics more of an opportunity to process what's really going on with the Accords, the Registration Act, the
genuinely
divide.
Choose a side.
Yes, the real consequences that these heroes have to deal with, and that lead to further divisions among them. And I think in the comics, this idea that the reader continues to process and even change their own mind, kind of follow the narrative along, question their own how they side with these heroes. And I'd say in the comics, I had more moral distress in my kind of emotional state following the characters. I'd say in the comics, I was very, very invested in Captain America's side, and also kind of, at least in the beginning, interested in Tony Stark's vision with this. And in the movie, you see some of the same elements.
Yeah.
The same characters who are leaders among the two sides have the exact same division, the exact same interpersonal conflict. And that, I think, is really the core of Civil War and leads to losses and setbacks that then they have to deal with. The film, I'd say, has some high stakes, but isn't as... I'd say the losses aren't as severe. The consequences aren't as long-standing as the comics.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the comics are basically about the Superhero Registration Act and this idea that the government basically wants to employ, for lack of a better word, all of our superheroes. So they want them to take basically an oath to only work as assigned, similar to like law enforcement or the military, and they want them to pledge their allegiance to this governing body. The reason, of course, being because superheroes are ostensibly vigilantes. They work illegally. They work without any sort of oversight, and it leads to this war between Cap, who is in conflict with the Registration Act, and Iron Man primarily, who is in favor of the Registration Act. And then you've got characters who are, I would say, sort of stuck on that border between the two sides. Spider-Man is someone that I think of immediately. And what I like about what you said is the comics give you an opportunity to really choose a side, but then often throughout the course of the comics, depending on the events that have just unfolded, you might even switch sides.
Yeah.
You are constantly in conflict with what side you should be on, because again, it's not like it's a civil war between heroes and villains with nefarious schemes and deeds. You're talking about two sets of heroes who both think they're right. And they did a good job in the Marvel Universe of creating that conflict as well. And I can see where they have laid the seeds throughout the movies leading up to this struggle between Tony and Steve. The problem is, I feel like the movie is a movie. It's too hastily done. There isn't enough of a reason, I think, for most of these people on either side to choose a side. In most cases, it comes down to just loyalties to either Cap or... Which
you see in the comics. There are true bonds that solidify and continue to sustain over the course of that Civil War.
But in the case of the comics, you're talking about a cast of dozens of characters.
It triple the size of who we see in the film. And I think you kind of have to work it out, right? Why would Wanda seek loyalty and bonds with Cap. Well, Wanda, as stated in the film, isn't a citizen and has I'd say the fewest rights here, is likely to be interned, is already in the beginning of the film essentially locked in the compound and is unable to leave. So you see the stripping and denial of rights, and you side with her in the beginning in the sense of feeling empathy for her and feeling as though she, in the course of performing her job, made some mistakes and slipped, and many were killed. Yeah. On account of her actions.
Yeah.
So you start to kind of see the constraints, the stripping of liberties, the change, the all the sort of ways in which the way the government deals with the Avengers begins to change. And it does frighten people. I think
that's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, you would disagree.
I disagree when it comes to Wanda specifically.
Yeah, say more about that.
Okay, so when you're talking about internment, you're talking about taking a group of people who, for the most part, are innocent. I can't imagine. Like, when I think internment, I think the internment camps of the Japanese. Yeah. You're taking U.S. citizens who didn't do anything wrong, who aren't in any way involved with Pearl Harbor, and you are taking them and their families away from their homes. You are removing their familial artifacts, the collections of things that they've had through the years, specifically anything that is Japanese, and you are throwing them behind fences with armed guards. In the case of Wanda, she genuinely blew up a building, and there's this idea of just one movie ago, she was a villain. She was on the side of Ultron. She was recruited by Ultron. She helped Ultron. She then realized her mistake only after Ultron basically said, "Oh, you're going to be killed too. Like, I needed your help, and I am giving you everything I promised you, but I'm looking at it from a different perspective." She was ready to turn against the Avengers, and by extension, the rest of the world that they protect. She then joins the Avengers, and in an opportunity to protect Cap, she does make a mistake. And it's not even necessarily a mistake. It's just a lack of control. She did the right thing. She contained a bomb that Crossbones was wearing, a bomb vest that easily would have killed everyone in the courtyard or the area they were in, the marketplace. And she contains the explosion and sends it flying through the sky. The problem is she loses control, and it basically explodes 2 or 3 floors of a building. Right. And presumably there were many people who died in that building. Now, we don't know for a fact how many. We don't know. Maybe it was an office building and it's a Saturday. There were a lot of people in the marketplace. So maybe it's a Saturday. But the idea that they are then imprisoning her, and even then I would say that's a harsh term, because it was more like a house arrest. She was in the Avengers compound. Vision was there taking really good care of her, basically making sure that she was not only protected from outside people, who might be coming after her, but was also making sure she didn't leave.
Well, and there's a lot here, right? Without due process. Obviously, she admits to the explosion, and she admits to being responsible for the loss of life. She's not aware of the parameters and the various conditions under which she's in house arrest. She's not even informed that she's under house arrest. Yeah. And I will say, I use the word internment in quoting Cap. Cap does say that upon learning she was in house arrest, that this is like internment, and that she's just a kid. Yeah. So he makes that comment. I will say that metaphorically, right, the idea here that we're meant to consider, and that I think the book does a better job of, is laying out this notion that the government is arresting individuals who are superheroes, who simply have this identity. If they don't sign the registration, now in the comics it's called the Superhero Registration Act. In the film, the slight difference is everyone is recommended to sign the Sokovia Accords.
Yeah.
And Tony is essentially recruiting everybody to do so. I don't believe that you're arrested unless you actually do something to put somebody in danger.
Correct.
So it's almost like a precaution. Whereas in the comics, it's done.
Yeah.
If you don't sign, you are arrested.
Well, and now Secretary Thunderbolt Ross, he makes it clear. They say, what happens if we don't sign? And he says, you retire.
Yeah.
So you just stop doing what you're doing. Meanwhile, you've got characters like Cap who can't do that, who feel like they are constantly going to be fighting for the people, and
it's embedded in who he is. He can't not be Captain America. Whereas you have Hawkeye, who was in retirement and pretty willing to give that up.
Yeah, well, he had the family to consider.
Absolutely.
And he gives it up. So let's talk a little bit about this, because you said that the comics do a better job. I'm not going to deny that. I think the comics are infinitely better than this movie.
Okay.
The comics, you're talking about the Superhero Registration Act and what it means. Essentially, not only do the superheroes have to sign, they essentially have to unmask. They have to reveal their identities. And that is part of the crux of the problem, is these heroes who are against the act believe that it's violating their civil liberties, it's violating their privacy, and more importantly, it is endangering those loved ones and friends around them who might get brought in now with the identification of these heroes. So it's this classic case of, Spider-Man's had this a number of times, but it's this classic case of, if you know who I am, those around me are going to be in danger.
It's a huge occupational hazard, and this is why I'm saying the stakes are higher in the original Superhero Registration Act.
Yeah, but the comics were sort of written as an answer to what people were learning at the time, which is that the government genuinely was having surveillance of its citizens, and not just surveillance, like increased surveillance. I mean, and really without any sort of oversight. It's this idea that for the good of the country, we can really monitor anything we want. And as a result, and you did have people on both sides saying, well, I've got nothing to hide. So yeah, sure, read my text messages, listen to my phone calls. If it helps find terrorists, I'm for it. And then you've got the people who are like, this is a complete violation of my privacy as a U.S. citizen. So I don't understand how people can create this act. And you've got those different sides now.
And I'd add, especially when the surveillance is profiling, and then you sort of add a layer of potential decision making that is left to the government. That really exacerbates some of the compromising of liberties.
This idea that because I'm a middle-aged white male, I may not be on their surveillance list, but a friend of mine who is Muslim may automatically be on their surveillance list simply because of who they are or where they're from. And so, you've got this sort of skewed view of how this system should work, and it's wrong. And in the comics, they do a very good job of laying out Cap's reasons for going against the Superhero Registration Act. In the film, maybe this is where I ask you, because I very much want to just go ahead and say the film does a poor job because it just becomes about Cap, and it just becomes about Bucky, and it becomes about this idea that the governments, because it's basically the United Nations making the decision to do the Sokovia Accords, they want to make sure the Avengers and other heroes have oversight. And Cap is very much against that because we have seen over the course of the MCU so far, Cap is becoming disillusioned with governments and with, this regulated body that we can send you on whatever mission we want, regardless of whether it's really for the right reason. Mm-hmm. And because he has become disillusioned since his thawing out, he is a lot less trusting of governing bodies. He even says in the course of the movie, I put my faith in people, in individuals, and he will continue to do so. He will continue to fight for those individuals because he finds that they're less likely to be corrupt. Governments can be replaced. New regimes can come in, and those people all have their own agendas. This makes sense, except really what it's boiling down to is all the governments of the world want to kill the only friend I still have from the 1940s. Mm-hmm. And I need to protect him because I believe in him. I believe that everything he did was a result of him having been brainwashed. I believe that he is still the same Bucky Barnes that I remember as a kid. Despite the horrific things that Bucky has done under the basically the mask of the Winter Soldier. And so Cap literally just gives up everything to protect him.
I don't disagree, but I don't mind this plot. This is different than the comics. I don't mind this plot because it gives you an artifice. It gives you this, it puts the theory to the test. It's like, so let's then say that there's a situation that is morally ambiguous, mm-hmm. that makes us all feel uncomfortable with this so-called vigilante who has over the decades actively assassinated people, mm-hmm. Important people, which mm-hmm. we will soon learn.
And has worked for Hydra, who we know.
Who is literally the enemy, mm-hmm. but is an outcome of an experimental brainwashing technique that Hydra has perfected at this time and has created Winter Soldiers, plural, and Bucky happens to be one of them.
Yeah, the first.
So I don't mind that it's putting his value set, putting Cap's value set to the test to say, like, on paper, this person really should be arrested and tried and probably incarcerated because of his actions. And this is where Cap says, I think what you're saying is, would he be like this if it were a different person?
Right.
Not Bucky?
Right.
That's an excellent point.
He takes it upon himself. He even says the only way, because basically this comes down to one line of dialogue. Mm-hmm. Sharon warns him that that the government is on orders to shoot to kill Bucky on sight. And because of this, Cap insists that he has to be the one to bring Bucky in. Mm-hmm. And so he wants to make sure he's brought in, but brought in safely, brought in alive, brought in with the idea that he can be deprogrammed. And I wouldn't say that you're wrong, but you're also the main guy who didn't sign the accord. So now everything you're doing is against the law. You're now actively pursuing, as a vigilante, this character for good reasons, but you are breaking the law. I don't know. If it were any other person, I don't know that he would take that approach. If it were... if it's just Zemo, for instance.
I was just thinking about Zemo. Can I just confess, when Zemo pops up in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show, mm-hmm. I honestly was like, who's this? Like, I forgot who he was.
Yeah. Well, you have no memory for this sort of thing.
Yeah. But seeing Zemo's story now again, being reminded of Zemo's story, was helpful because Zemo is not your villain who goes and gets the suit or gets the brainwashed to become Winter Soldier. Like he doesn't do that thing that we hate in all the sequels in the Marvel films, just to sort of, take the superhero's power and double, triple it and become menacing. He does something that I think is incredibly, yes, it's vicious and painful, and it's injurious to Tony Stark. And he does something that's very, very planful. He tries to create a rift among the superheroes. This is the end of the movie, so, spoilers here.
You find out his motivation for everything. Yeah.
Zemo, and I think I'm kind of hopefully getting to the point you're trying to make. Zemo's family died as one of many casualties in, was it Lagos or the other one?
Sokovia.
Sokovia. And I mean, here we have a problem where we can't even recall which disaster traumatized this man, but
right. See, now you're understanding the reason for the Accords.
So this innocent man,
well, he's a colonel in an elite covert special ops.
Wait, he was in Hydra before,
team.
So he was in Hydra before that.
No, he wasn't in Hydra. He was a Sokovian colonel who led like the special ops Sokovian team. Like he was part of the military.
So this man loses his spouse and children during this conflict. And look, this isn't unheard of during war, where you have multiple casualties, civilian casualties, right? He decides to go after Tony and Cap in particular to reveal that the Winter Soldier murdered Tony's parents. A night that Tony recalls well, and it in fact is the opening of the film. Tony admits that this traumatic event has shaped him, and in fact is building this behavioral intervention that he claims will not cure the trauma, but kind of undo, like remove these painful memories. And I know you have the clip of this. I think his description is better than mine.
Yeah, I'll play it right now.
Binarily augmented retroframing, or BARF. God, I gotta work on that acronym. An extremely costly method of hijacking the hippocampus to clear traumatic memories. It doesn't change the fact that they never made it to the airport, or all the things I did to avoid processing my grief. But plus $611 million for my little therapeutic experiment. No one in their right mind would have ever funded it.
We should also say that Tony, up until finding out at the end of the movie that his parents were murdered, always believed his parents just died in a car crash. He didn't know that they had been murdered until he sees video footage of Winter Soldier doing it himself.
I mean, a horrific discovery, the very thing that has shaped his psychology, his decades of living with this loss, unrepaired loss, now to find that this guy that his best friend is protecting murdered his parents. And to have video of that too, to watch that video is extremely traumatic.
And the most powerful line maybe in the entire movie. In fact, I have it here. Let's play it.
He's my friend. So was I.
And so we might as well get right into it, right? That yes, you have the backdrop of the Sokovia Accords creating this global chasm among the Avengers and the extended family of the Avengers. But at the center of this story is the relationship between Cap and Tony, right? The best friends, the loyal friends who have always had differences, but have worked together and have been able to find common ground and have been able to, despite some of these, yes, losses and setbacks, and civilian casualties have been able to be on the same page. But here, this now becomes personal. And I think at this point, Tony gives up on any willingness to be on the same page with a friend who kept this information from him. At some point, Captain America admits that he knew this. He knew about the murder of Tony Stark's parents. He, in fact, Captain America was a friend of Daddy Stark's.
Daddy Stark?
Daddy Stark's.
Oh.
Oh my gosh. Any other day I could tell you his name. But they were pals, right? In the 40s and 50s. And so it would make sense that Captain America knows something about this, but he's kept it from Tony.
Yeah.
Which becomes an even sort of bigger rupture, right?
Yeah.
You knew this about my family. You knew it caused me great pain. And yet you withheld this information.
And Steve says he did it because he felt like he was protecting Tony. But when you're talking about a character who's already got so many walls built up between him and the rest of the world, that's truly the worst possible move you could make, because now you have destroyed any opportunity for him to trust you as Captain America. And in fact, he already disliked you because you essentially overshadowed Tony's own existence by being the greatest project that his father Howard ever ever worked on. And in fact, he even mentions that he heard 1,000 times the fact that Howard Stark knew Captain America. And you know that Tony is bitter over this. It's almost like Steve was the son that Howard wished he had, was the creation that he wished he had, despite the fact that we know from Iron Man 2 that Howard believes his greatest creation was Tony. But again, you're also talking about, if we go back to that's what I like about doing these in order, Drea, is this idea of these sort of chronology of the whole thing. Tony sort of grew up bitter over his father until he learns in Iron Man 2 that Howard always loved Tony and in fact was building an empire for Tony. And he's still going with that, I would say, new take on his father. He has a renewed sense of love and affection for his father and guilt for having treated them the way that he did on the last day that he saw them alive. And now you're going with this character Cap, who was already a big part of that resentment, now withholding this information about his parents' death. I don't blame Tony for any of the feelings that he is feeling at the end of this movie. Now, do I agree that he should go into a vengeful rage and try to kill both of them? No. But I see where he's coming from. I get it.
I think it's nearly impossible for him to detach that personal wound, right, from this bigger dispute that they're having.
By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't point out a very important line of Tony's. When Cap is trying to convince Tony that it wouldn't be right to kill Bucky, Tony says he killed my mom. He doesn't even mention Howard. Like you and I were just talking about Howard. Mm-hmm. He's not even talking about Daddy Stark. He says he killed my mom. And that's a huge deal, I think, in the context of this story as well.
And I think, yes, this takes away this really, this plot has kind of gotten away from the original source. But I also think it helps us understand their beliefs, especially their interpersonal beliefs, right? You have someone like Tony who is incredibly independent, kind of isolated, doesn't really rely on loyalty and family and bonds, sort of believes in the strength of his own ideas, his vision, with the exception of an alliance with the government, which I think narcissistically he believes he can overpower, right?
Oh, that's interesting. That is not at all what I
That's
think.
sort of how I see.
Oh,
I mean, he
that's-
does it. He does it later in the film.
Sure.
Where he, trips the system at the Raft
Yeah.
prison,
Yeah.
which we definitely need to talk about.
Yes.
And already has, very much like Batman, he has these
Contingencies.
he has these ways, these solutions, these plans in which he can override or subvert the government.
Well, he even promises,
system.
he tells Cap to sign the accord and we will make amendments to it later. Like
and I think he believes he can do that. I don't think he's just saying that.
But think about it this way too. Remember the Tony Stark, and this is really all about Tony. Remember the Tony Stark that we were introduced to in Iron Man. Mm-hmm. And more specifically, remember the Tony Stark that we discovered in Iron Man 2, where he is actively going up against the government. There is only one Iron Man. You will not get regulation over my suit. This will not become a weapon of mass destruction for you. This is mine. I am autonomous. He was so anti-authoritarian.
Absolutely.
Leading up to. The problem is, the Accords make so much sense in the context of this MCU. Ross, as well as other people, talk about the countless damage and lives lost during all of these movies. And this is the governments of the world, not just the U.S. government, as in the comics, but the governments of the world uniting to say, hey, can we put a leash on these people who are just running around and blowing stuff up and destroying entire cities and now we're finding out killing people around those cities. So this, and think about Tony. Tony has spent the entire arc up to this point believing that only he could save the world, believing that it was his responsibility to lead the team. And now, after failure after failure after failure after failure, that he is just building guilt over. I mean, remember, it's the reason he built Ultron.
Right.
And then Ultron turned out to be a colossal failure. Tony has now come to the conclusion that he can't do it.
He's surely humbled by what's happened over the course of the films.
Tony believes that he needs to be put in check as much as any of the others, because he acknowledges this is my mistake. And he's even talking about it with Pepper. Pepper is gone. They are taking a break because he has made countless mistakes believing that only he could do it.
I think he acknowledges that he is destructive as Iron Man. And the alliance or the oversight that he's willing to invite or encourage with the government is something that I think he's able to work with. For the reason that I said, because I think he is bright and narcissistic enough to believe that he will always have some level of control. But also because of the reasons you said, that he knows he isn't able to do anything he wants to do without the collaboration and even the technologies that the government offers him, or rather the space, the room, the ability for his own technologies. So I think within him you see these traits that have been pretty consistent. This belief generally in oversight, that from the beginning he did believe in sort of this dominant power, in the spirit of safety, in the spirit of safeguards, right? Whereas Steve Rogers is an idealist and refuses you, and I think you've named it. I think Tony has made accommodations in his own psychology about how to protect the Earth, whereas unfortunately Steve Rogers isn't making those accommodations mentally. He's an idealist, and he continues to be unwilling to budge. That's sort of what his worldview is, right? We see this in the comics. Sadly, Sharon Carter gets to say the line that at her mother's funeral that belongs to Captain America in the comics, and I'm bummed that happened. I think he should say the line. I know you have this.
I do have it. Her speech at the funeral. Here we go.
And she said, compromise where you can. But where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move.
So obviously he believes in the dignity and the purity of the right to choose. And he even says this when, of all people, Vision exclaims, because we are so strong, because we are so powerful, we're actually inviting threats. Mm-hmm. We are bringing this on.
This is a classic argument that we've, or not an argument between us, but this is the classic argument that is held about Batman in Gotham City is that the rogues keep coming to Gotham because Batman is a great challenge. Yeah. And so the existence of Batman is making Gotham worse, not better.
And Vision, being non-human, probably one of the top 3 strongest Avengers, names that, because we're so powerful, we need to be responsible for what we welcome to our territory.
Who are the 2 stronger?
Oh, well, Wanda.
Vision?
Wanda's stronger than Vision.
Yeah, but who's the other one? Who is the other Avenger stronger than Vision? If you put him in the top 3, that means you're probably you're ranking him 3rd. So I'm wondering.
That is a really, really good question.
Okay, so we're going to say that he's in the top 2 most powerful Avengers. Okay.
Well, I mean, he could be in the top 3 and be second.
That's true, but then I want to know. Then I want to know who comes right up behind him. I mean, in that case, then he's also in the top 10. Okay, so. So yeah, you're right. He is the one, and by the way, he's the one who is basically the perfect being. He is built on the logic, but he also has the empathy. He understands both sides of the equation, and he is boiling it down to, we should sign this.
Yeah.
And he does. Vision signs it. Can we talk about the other people though? Because we're now going into the groups of like who is signing and who isn't.
Right.
And this is one of the problems I have with the movie. And I talked about this at the beginning a little bit. Everyone else just sort of falls in line with their loyalties. And I realize that this happens in the comics to a degree, but then you've got other people who break loyalties in the comics. And here it comes down to, you've got Cap on one side, and there's this conversation with Sam about, Sam just being like, are you sure? Like, tell me you're sure, because the people who shoot at you usually end up shooting at me as well. This is Sam saying, I don't really know what side to go on, but I'm with you. So, I'm fine with the loyalty between friends, but when you're talking about a soldier being willing to break the law or not retire as Falcon, just because his friend, who he even expresses questions about, he's even like, is this the right thing to do, Cap? Like, are we sure about this? I don't love that. I appreciate that the question was asked, but I don't like that Sam just hops on because Cap is like, yeah, follow me, trust me.
I actually don't mind it because, think about the era that we're in now. I think there are a lot of people doing that right now. I have evidence and information on one side about this pandemic. I have people in my family or in my community doing something different. A lot of people are choosing to do what their loved ones are doing. Not everybody, but I think you're going to have some people fall into the category of, I feel an amount of distress around this decision making, and I'm going to side or align with the people that I trust and that are very much like me, because they're like me. So the affinity toward other people, and this is actually grounded in research, that the connection and affinity you might have could shape your behaviors, even more so than the actual evidence that's in front of you.
On the other side, you've got Rhodey, who actively makes the decision to join Tony, maybe even because he's a career military guy. I mean, he believes in the Accords. He believes,
for sure.
And even at the end, when we find out that Rhodey is essentially paralyzed and cannot walk without the aid of technology created by Stark, that he would still sign him. He still would have done everything that he did to go up against Cap and his team. But again, it's broken down into what character was introduced in which movie. It's now Rhodey is automatically on the side of Iron Man. And if nothing else, that could be a strategic move, because I have a feeling War Machine would have suddenly not worked if he had gone up against Tony. But
it actually does make sense. Some of these previous alliances will continue to be bonds and form the decision making. The only one that doesn't, and even this isn't true, but we'll say it. The only bond that is not respected in terms of which side they appear on is Hawkeye and Black Widow. The two best of friends, and the two people who love each other more than anyone else on either of these teams are on opposite sides in the beginning. But she, turns sides at the end of the battle at the airport, and she lets Cap go with Bucky. She actively holds Black Panther back. And we find out that even in the fight between Hawkeye and Black Widow, they're both pulling their own punches. So neither one is really fighting. So I'm not even saying that loyalty is broken. I'm just saying at the beginning of the fight, they were on opposite sides. Right. Well, let me talk about who really is fighting. And I think this is interesting. It's Vision, who... he's misguided in a moment and accidentally strikes War Machine. Yeah. And that is, and they're on the same side because he was going for Falcon, right? So
he even says he was distracted.
He was distracted, obviously, by Wanda, who he is learning he cares for at a deeper level. And what's interesting to me is that, in a way, when Rhodey says, I haven't really changed my perspective on this, it's because, he's injured because someone on his very team got distracted, which is to give evidence that these heroes are not perfect and can and may wound not just civilians, but each other. And so I think he now has, I'm not surprised by his answer. I think he has evidence of that. Now, this casualty is not as huge compared to the comics. There are much bigger losses in the comics, but I think this is a moment of pause for everybody. We're destroying each other, and someone almost got killed because of our rift. I think that it either for many will solidify and folks, solidify their values and they will double down. But for some, it will make them really reconsider what it is that they need to do.
What's interesting about the time in which he says that that he doubles down is that, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, he says it at the end of the movie. It's at the very end. It's after Tony has already helped Cap.
Right.
And so this is with the knowledge that Cap was right in that Bucky didn't do it, not in necessarily the actions that he took to make his point. But Rhodey knows that Cap was right about Bucky and still says it was a right thing to do to sign the Accords. Like, he still holds that Cap is in the wrong. And I, even though I'm paralyzed, that didn't change my opinion of this. And by the way, I don't think it changes my opinion of it either. I think based on the MCU, we have proven that these guys need a little oversight. There was less damage when they belonged to S.H.I.E.L.D. than there is after. So, and so like, you know, when you've got somebody like Nick Fury leading the group, I think you're less likely to have all these problems.
Right. You need sort of an independent, not neutral, but an independent governing body that can handle the superhero extra legal vigilante activity and ensure that it doesn't pass the threshold of criminal activity.
And the thing about Nick is Nick Fury knew how to walk the line between legal and not. He knew when to turn a blind eye, his only good eye, to the goings on of certain members of the team, if it were in the name of what is good in the world. And I will say this about Nick Fury. He is a great buffer between the powers that be and the Avengers, because the Avengers never deal with the council. That's all Nick Fury. Nick Fury is the one constantly arguing for them and advocating for what they're doing. And he's usually right and usually wins. And so maybe this goes again to your point about Cap. Is he a better soldier than a leader? Because when he's a leader, he has a tendency to break up the team. He has this tendency to go off on his own, and you know, I don't know. This movie does not make me feel as good about Cap as maybe the filmmakers wanted me to feel. Like, I feel like they wanted me to be on his side, but I just see more need for oversight. I mean, even after he refuses to sign it, and T'Chaka is killed during his speech, he instantly jumps off the rails and goes after Bucky, and there is more destruction, more chaos, and it's really all because of this one dude that honestly makes no sense, because at the airport, Cap could have handed him over to a group of people he knew wouldn't shoot to kill. Like, okay, here's Bucky. I did it. I proved that I could do this. Here is my friend. He is alive. You can now take him. But he didn't. They blew up an airport so that he could get away with Bucky. And chase down. It's because they had information on the other Winter Soldiers.
They needed to go to the site where the other Winter Soldiers were being
kept. But why can't Cap say that at the airport? Hey, Tony, there are other Winter Soldiers, and Zemo is now on his way to activate them. Let's go. Here's my friend. I'm handing him over. And even at the end of the movie, he doesn't hand over Bucky. Instead, he basically takes him to Wakanda and allows the Wakandans to do their thing with Bucky. There's a real weird sense of I realize that it's his personal morality, but it's sort of getting in the way of logic in several scenes in this movie, in my opinion. I realize we've got listeners who are yelling at the podcast.
I mean, well, let me ask you about the Raft. So this is a super lockdown prison.
It's not just Supermax. It is is under the water. It is in the ocean. It is under the water.
I'm not even sure how this works.
They have built a prison that is in the ocean under the water. And when it needs to be accessed, the prison raises above the water. You fly in. The canopy opens at the top, you fly in, you land, canopy closes, it goes back under the water.
So how did you process that scene? Because you realize that this is imprisonment at this time. And these are the handful of folks that not only didn't sign the Accords, but were willingly protecting Bucky and potentially caused a little bit more destruction.
Yes.
These were the folks, Ant-Man,
Hawkeye,
Scarlet Witch. So they're in the Supermax prison in these tiny cells.
Yeah.
They have to be, I think aside from Hawkeye, they essentially need to be in this extremely isolated, very constrained, limited cell environment because of their powers.
Yeah.
So you almost have...
well, but most of them don't have powers. Most of them...
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, Wanda, again, is the biggest threat here, but they're all in a similar cell.
Right.
What were your thoughts about that scene?
I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it. And Tony says it. You know, they're all trying to make him feel bad. They're all calling him names. They're all talking about how he'll stab you in the back. Better watch yourself. He could get you killed. Making a direct reference to Rhodey. But he counters with, you were breaking the law.
Yeah.
And it's not like we're seeing Susie Jenkins from down the street in one of these Supermax. We're talking about the Avengers. We're talking about, like, powers or not, you can't tell me that if put in a regular situation, Hawkeye's not going to find a way out. That has literally been his entire life. His job is infiltration and getting out and killing people and doing that stuff. You got to put him into a Supermax prison. You've got to do the same thing with someone like Falcon. We see that Sam is also there.
Right,
and Tony asks Sam, are they feeding you? Are they taking care of you? Tony makes it clear he didn't know this prison even existed, let alone know that he was going to bring them here.
Which, by the way, a huge difference, because in the comics, he co-designs the prison.
And he may have co-designed this prison, but he didn't necessarily know they were going to be sent here. I don't know what
the comics is in the comics. He not only co-designs it, but he is actively trying to get people, and it's an interdimensional kind of prison thing.
Right.
People are not aware that it's as
well. And he's working with
constrained.
He's working with Mr. Fantastic. And,
yes, and one could argue Mr. Fantastic is even more heinous.
Well, in the comics, Reed becomes straight up authoritarian. But yeah, you're not talking about, again, I don't want to use internment, because this is rounding up normal people and putting them in prisons. You are rounding up superheroes, now technically super villains, maybe super foes, and you are putting them in the most Supermax of places, because where else are you going to hold them? Now, I realize Scott Lang's not going anywhere. Scott's the least likely.
He needs the suit to do anything. He needs
the suit, but but you've got Falcon and you've got Hawkeye at the very least, who are more than capable of getting out of this situation. And God forbid they let Wanda out, because if they let Wanda out, this entire place is screwed. So, if anything, I would put them all in different areas of the Supermax prison. I wouldn't put them all in the same room. But that's why I'm okay with this particular prison. And if they're trying to convince me that this prison is unnecessary, show me other people who are in it. Show me regular people who have been rounded up and just sort of thrown into a Supermax. This is not... You're not doing a good job of convincing me this prison is above and beyond.
And I agree to the extent that this would have been a vastly different moment if this imprisonment was a result of refusal to sign the Accords and simply living as a superhero.
100%.
Like you're right. You're then it becomes discriminatory, right? It truly becomes an internment prison.
Yes.
Because you are rounding up people who identify or who have been discovered to be superheroes and who refuse to register their names under the law.
Yeah.
I think that would have been, of course, and that's much more similar.
That's egregious.
I know we keep talking about the comic books, but that would land differently than what we see here. But we can't help, because we care about these people, we can't help but feel empathy for their situations. And I think I'm probably feeling a sense of like, I would want to, I think the reason why I feel more ambiguous about the Raft prison is that I believe that they acted in a way that they felt was right. They felt was actually, protecting people, that they felt that more of the story needed to be told. And of course, Tony realizes he was wrong, and that Bucky never was the person who blew up the embassy or that big building that resulted in the Wakandan king dying. Bucky had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
And that was the catalyst that led to, all of these swift decisions. So it's a part of me is like, yes, this action seems right, but it's the temporary nature of it that I can probably support or probably feel okay with, that more of the story needs to be told.
Yeah. Ultimately, I'm okay with the prison.
I see that.
And by the way, at the end of the movie, in the tag, what happens? Even after Cap has made his point, even after Cap has gotten Bucky to safety, he has done the one thing that he was going to do. He has done the one thing that made him step outside of the law, until he decides to go break his buddies out of prison. Like, he shows up at the Supermax, at the Raft.
Yeah.
We see the carnage that is, we see the people lying on the ground, these people that he has, I guess, knocked out. I don't know. Cap doesn't really have a Batman-like vow to never kill. He is a soldier after all.
Those security guards.
I'm just saying they're laying on the ground.
Right.
And then he shows up and he breaks his friends out of prison. Cap is becoming a legit threat to, I would say, the world at this point. Because, if you're now releasing Wanda, you're now releasing Falcon, you're now releasing Hawkeye, you're just taking your team back. This is unnecessary, because this has gone against what you believed you were doing. He understood the Accord. He understood the principle of the Accord. He refused to sign it, knowing that it could mean imprisonment. The other group with him refused to sign it, knowing that it could mean prison.
But so he's a purist in the way that he's always been, right? He globally rejects the Accords, which means anybody who's imprisoned as a result of these new acts these new legislative bills are falsely or wrongly held, right? I think that this is his mentality.
Is that right?
Is that right? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, do we now just go the route of the "don't tread on me" libertarians who just say,
I see what you're saying.
Let me do what I want on my land, regardless of regulations and regardless of state or federal laws. Let me do what I want because I don't agree with the laws and the accords that you've set up. I do not agree with your government. Is that what we're talking about? And now going so far as to, look, if you want to go hang out in Wakanda for a while, fine. But now you've gone into a federal prison or an international prison. You have...
You've released these incredibly powerful and law-breaking superheroes.
And you've not just done that. You have attacked the people who work at that prison.
Yeah.
Am I supposed to take Cap's side at this point?
I think we actually are.
Because he comes in with a smile?
No, I think we are. And I recall, people being jubilant and cheering during that scene in the theater. I think we're meant to hold, and I think if we can, now we're boiling down to kind of the highlights of the film. What's helpful about this film, and I think for us as a society, and let me be bold enough to say that, is that we can actually hold these ideas at the same time. We can hold two frameworks, two worldviews in our psychology almost simultaneously. We are able to understand Tony Stark to the degree that when he discovers what truly happened to his parents, we're like, oh hell no, we are twisted by this. We are turned by this. We also are fueled by Steve Rogers' unwillingness to budge on his ideals and his beliefs, because all of us carry a framework of beliefs and probably feel the same way about our beliefs, no matter what, right? So I think what is truly helpful about this movie is that you and I, who are very, very similar, kind of walk away with different ideas about this, but we're both still able to understand where these characters are coming from. We're able to process dissimilar frameworks, and that ability, it's a complicated thing, but that ability to hold dialectical information, opposing information is a strength of ours as human beings.
I do have one question that I want to talk to you about, and I think it's something that we have touched on a handful of times in previous episodes. Most recently, I think Winter Soldier. I want to ask you about Bucky, and I want to ask you about the brainwashing or programming of the Winter Soldier and the way that it is done with multiple, what seems like unrelated words said in a particular cadence, in a particular order. And when it's all said and done, Bucky is now officially Winter Soldier. He is now given a mission. He now succeeds at that mission or dies trying, and then comes back and is shut down, put into the cryo freeze. And we had been meant to believe, or at least I thought it was meant to believe, that Bucky, that his mind was basically wiped in between each mission. But we actually learn that Bucky remembers every single one of the kills he's made in the last however many years. So my question for you as a psychologist, as a scientist, first and foremost, I realize you've never brainwashed anyone and you've never been necessarily involved with the deprogramming of people, but what is your take on programming and deprogramming, brainwashing or not, of people, whether they are people who belong to cults or people who, like a Manchurian Candidate or whatever? What is your take on that entire premise?
Well, and I'm glad that you mention the pop cultural references to brainwashing. The Manchurian Candidate, Clockwork Orange, certainly the Winter Soldier. We have these very mainstream media portrayals of brainwashing, and those are fictional. Now, Bucky's situation is very specific. He's sort of strapped to this very technical experimental machine. It ostensibly sends electrical currents through his body. It's painful. We've seen a scene that shows him enduring serious, extreme amount of pain, and this both wipes his brain, but also apparently sets the canvas for him then to be reprogrammed. So I will say that this one in particular is a very extreme example of brainwashing, and there is no equivalent in real life of that version of brainwashing. This idea that you can wipe someone's brain with a machine like this, aside from literally lobotomy, right? Which does not work this way. And then code or program him to do certain things based on word association. This idea that there's a lock and key. I have the right formula, I have the right phrase, I'll say a thing, and he'll have a very specific set of actions.
Yeah.
Without any thoughtfulness or mind of his own, right? That's the TV and movie version of brainwashing. I will say, though, there are some truthful elements here that we don't necessarily know through experiments, because it's unethical to do these kinds of experiments. Mm-hmm. Even in your favorite time, your favorite era.
The golden age of psychology, where all experiments were fair game?
Even in the 60s, where it was just everyone just, ran amok.
It was a very important time for psychology.
But psychologists do study this, and there's a huge area of work where we learned quite a bit from POWs. So the folks who are held in prison camps, who have endured various forms of torture, isolation, and control. And that's where we realize that there are versions of this, and we see that if you limit resources, if you malnourish people, if you torture them, then you will create a dynamic in the environment that makes them more prone to suggestion, that actually it has proven that people will confess to things that never happened or that they were never involved in. It's incredibly dangerous. It's not reliable. They no longer are truthful, and they've succumbed to the brainwasher, if we're still using that term. Psychologists often refer or like to use terms like, persuasion, coercion, thought reform. We don't like brainwashing because it's really been accommodated and used by pop culture in these more extreme ways, and we don't want to get things twisted like that. But there are some examples that show that people have changed their entire identities because of their experiences as prisoners. And you and I have seen many a documentary that shows how cults can also demonstrate these changes in behaviors. Again, under the right conditions, and in cults, interestingly, the non-physical coercion. So there really isn't physical, a lot of times, there isn't physical abuse.
Yeah.
It's all sort of this mind control, asserting influence, trying to create the ideal conditions for eradicating the person's initial identity and instilling this sort of newer identity that is meant to, be a new set of attitudes and beliefs. And in fact, in group settings, we've seen those shifts lead to group suicides, mass suicides. And so those are extreme versions. I would still couch that under brainwashing. I would still consider that to be an extreme form of coercion.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing with Bucky, this sort of, again, this lock and key, isn't necessarily realistic, that you kind of snap your fingers, say a certain type of word and words in Russian, and then suddenly he's a different person. And I think what you're saying is true and telling. He remembers everything. And he says this, that he remembers all the horrors that he's involved in.
Yeah.
And I think that reminds us that, maybe there are elements here that are more realistic, that he's undergoing not brainwashing, he's undergoing torture. So under this system of torture, he learns that he has to essentially comply with the expectations and the directives of the people in power, in this case, the Hydra leadership and experimenters, in order to survive. So it becomes a survival mode. It becomes, when they say these series of things, I'm going to follow these commands. I'm going to play the role of the brainwashee in order to live. The thing that Bucky is willing to do is actually go through with the murders, which tells us that is there something in him that is dark enough, vicious enough to comply
That's why he feels so bad, why he feels so guilty, because he believes that he should have been stronger, either mentally or morally or whatever, to counteract whatever brainwashing they did. He feels like he wasn't strong enough, and therefore, regardless of the fact that it was not the Bucky everyone knows and loves, including himself, he is still the person who did it. He still pulled all those triggers or used all those knives or blew up a car that then went into a tree and then smashed their heads, with his own hand. And
Yikes.
then, stuff like that. He understands that this was all him. And in fact, I think even in that moment where we see the brutality of what he did to Howard Stark, there's a moment where Bucky, the Winter Soldier, looks down at Howard and basically assesses, how am I going to do this? And you would think if he's just a cold, uncalculating machine, that he would just go, do it, be done with the mission, leave. But there's a moment where he kind of looks down at Howard and then decides, I'm just going to beat you with the palm of my hand several times and then sit you up into the car to make it look like you smashed your head on the steering wheel and all that. And so it's that moment of contemplation. It's almost that sanity versus insanity argument. You can see the moment where he is calculating how he's going to do this. And I kind of think that is the stuff Bucky is most
now
feels the most guilty about.
Sure. So are you saying that a part of this that he is voluntarily participating in this, that a part of this is his willingness to participate in violence?
I don't know, but I think Bucky is afraid that he was. I think it's easy for everyone around Bucky to say, this wasn't you. You were brainwashed by Hydra. This was a different being altogether. You shouldn't feel responsible. But I think Bucky, especially because he remembers each and every one of those victims, I think there's a part of Bucky that wonders if he was okay with it. If there was a part of him, like you were saying, a part of him deep down inside that was dark enough that gave in to those impulses, or gave into that program.
Sure. And let me say that there is some research to support the idea that there's more of an integrated participation in the change of beliefs or the change of someone's identity versus this sort of like complete dissociation. And again, a lot of this work comes from the 50s and 60s, actually, the studies on former prisoners of war, in particular the Korean War. And the work that comes from this shows that the prisoners who have escaped or been released had identified with a number of different steps that now have become these categories for or components that are a part of a very brainwashing style of transformation. You know, how do you go from an innocent, seemingly innocent person to now your set of beliefs is completely different. You are taking actions that are unlike you. Remember Patty Hearst? Yes. I don't remember Patty Hearst, but I'm familiar with the Patty Hearst complete transformation where she is a prisoner or she's held captive, and then suddenly she's
a
holding
hostage
a gun
and
holding people up. So that sort of change in behavior. And each of these stages, again, require those very extreme conditions, an environment of isolation, no reference points to your social relationships. So for Bucky, no reference points to Captain America, no social environmental reference points to turn to. And these mind clouding techniques that we've actually talked about on the show before: sleep deprivation, malnutrition, some forms of abuse, right? The constant threat of physical harm, for instance. And we break this down to things that I think actually happened to Bucky. I'm going to name off 4 things. One is the assault on identity. You're not who you think you are. So this is a constant systemic attack on the sense of self, and the belief system. You're not a man. You're not a friend. You're not an ally. You're not defending freedom. This is actually who you are. You're the Winter Soldier. You're an assassin. You kill. You assassinate. Whatever those directives and identity markers are. The second component is all around guilt. You are bad. So as this identity crisis is settling in, then the brainwasher is constantly creating an overwhelming sense of guilt. These are repeated attacks on the subject. This is criticism. This is you are evil. You are meant to kill. You are a tool. You are a weapon. And I imagine that some of the torture that Bucky experiences are a part of that narrative. You're being tortured because you are a bad person and you're meant for one thing, which is what else do you have but to kill other bad people?
Yeah.
That's the only thing you're good for.
Right.
The third thing is self-betrayal. So this is, you must now agree with me that you're bad. So you're completely, drowning in your guilt. You're fragmented. You're disoriented. And at that time, the torture, the limited resources, the environmental deprivation is setting in. And now it's time to denounce everyone your family, friends, peers, the side that you thought you were on. You must now align. You have no choice but to align with the evil, align and agree that you are bad.
Right.
And that's the hinging on this new loyalty, right? Well, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And that's the fourth point, which is that breaking point. Who am I? What do I do now? And now it's like, here's your answer. Here are your weapons. Here are the people that will tell you what to do. Here's what to do now that you have that deep shame, that guilt. It's not so much, we don't necessarily believe in having a mental breakdown, but this is kind of a crisis, or this is a breaking point.
Right.
This is the answer to resolving all the conflicts within the person. And clearly, again, this is extremely rare. It's only under extreme conditions. It's a long process. You don't do this overnight to somebody, and requires a sophisticated agency like Hydra. So I think there are parts of this that actually do ring true. The only parts that are questionable would be, again, that lock and key, that sense of, that Manchurian Candidate style of you don't know anything, you're minding your business, and then suddenly someone says the right thing and you are on this rampage.
Right.
That is not necessarily the most realistic aspect of Bucky's psychology here.
Could I give you my...
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So if you're a listener dating back to the beginning of the Arkham Sessions podcast, you might remember that there was a period of time there where I would try to come in every episode and give you a real life tale from that sort of paralleled what we were talking about. And I want to bring up someone that actually you have talked about recently, and that's Darren Brown, the magician, mentalist, hypnotist, entertainer. Incredibly popular in the United Kingdom, should definitely be seen by more people here in the US. But I don't know how familiar you are with Sirhan Sirhan.
A little bit. This is the famous mentalist / magician who was humiliated.
Oh, no.
No, who am I thinking of?
That's Uri Geller.
Oh, okay.
No. He bent spoons.
I'm thinking of the spoon guy.
Yeah, he bent spoons. No. So Sirhan Sirhan is the assassin of Robert Kennedy.
Okay.
So
okay, we need to put off the record that I don't know.
You don't know Sirhan Sirhan. Okay, so Sirhan Sirhan was the assassin of Bobby Kennedy. So he had a significant amount of hatred for Kennedy because of some of the campaign promises he was making in regard to a war that was going on in his home country at the time. And later, after his conviction, it was posited in a appeal that he was actually hypnotized, brainwashed, and was basically given a code word to then assassinate Bobby Kennedy, and that he didn't know what he was doing. Now, this was one of many different appeals that all had different reasons for him not having been guilty. Out of curiosity, Darren Brown then decided to take this on as an experiment. Could I find an unwitting assassin, program them for a month, and then have that person pull off the assassination without ever having known that they had been programmed to do so? So this is someone who was not trained to be an assassin. This was someone who, through a series of different things over the course of a month, intense tests and whatever's of susceptibility, had nothing to do with here's how a gun works, had nothing to do with here's how this works, had nothing to do with here's what you're going to do. There's going to be a package under your seat. You're then going to pick up the package. You're going to assemble the gun. You're going to shoot. He basically programmed this person over a month to go to a live performance by the actor Stephen Fry. And during that performance, he was going to lean down, pick up a gun from under the seat, assemble it, put the bullet in, and shoot without knowing that he was even doing it.
So truly being puppeted by Darren Brown.
Correct.
As an experiment, and ostensibly in a safe way. This wouldn't...
Yes.
Knowing Darren Brown, it would be incredibly similar to the actual, like the simulation would be very close to what the... it would approximate
the golden age of psychology.
I mean, truly, it would approximate, the intended situation, but it would be safe.
Yes. So Stephen Fry was in on it. He knew that night, giving this performance, he was going to get shot on stage. And so, sure enough, the guy, now, whether you want to believe that it's true or not, again, Darren Brown is an entertainer. However, Darren Brown is famous for being a guy who is incredibly forthcoming about his techniques and very forthcoming about this is how I do it. This is what you should not believe. This is what you should believe. And he basically concluded that it might actually be possible, given a certain amount of time, to take a person who had no idea they were going to become an assassin and on the day or night of trigger that person into pulling a trigger of their own. It was frightening. And then they say at the end of the special, by the way, was Darren Brown, the Assassin. That was the name of the special.
Okay.
And I highly recommend people check it out. I know that you can find it on YouTube. It's really, really fascinating, if for no other reason, just to watch him whittle it down to who the person will be, because in most of his experiments, he has like a group of 50 people that he then finally whittles down to the one person he feels like he can push to this point. And then you watch as step by step by step, this guy just ends up doing it.
Yeah, that person.
And then they say
they've got to give that person therapy.
That's the thing. At the end of the episode, they talk about, we then deprogrammed this person. We then talked to this person through everything that happened. We made them understand, and like they basically, you don't see it on camera,
sure,
but there's a chyron at the end of the program that's like, this person then underwent deprogramming, So again, you can take it for what you want. We've talked about hypnosis before. Darren Brown has even talked about hypnosis before and how there's no exact way to understand or know if it's real. And so I just encourage people to take a look, because if you're talking about the Winter Soldier, this is kind of the closest thing that we've been able to find to it.
No, there is... There was, way back in the early 2000s, the DC sniper attacks, where it was revealed that the older, now the two, I think it's a young teen, like 15 to 17. I think he ultimately was 17 years old. And sort of this older 40-something adult who wounded innocent folks in a killing spree.
By the way, one of those shootings happened at a gas station right next to my house at the time.
Oh, so you're very familiar with
like my
with
parents
this case.
would be very familiar with this case. Yes, the DC sniper in Fredericksburg, Virginia, he shot someone at the gas station that I always went to going to and from school. And so,
and then you might recall that the argument used in the trial was that the younger of the two, the 17-year-old, was brainwashed by the adult who somehow filled his mind with these visions of a race war and trained him to shoot a gun and trained him for marksmanship. And there was this relationship. He was his adopted son.
Right.
And this was an ongoing, unlike these Darren Brown experiments, this is akin to what we were describing before, an ongoing, longer relationship that involved probably a deprivation of other resources and relationships. Interestingly, the defense was not well supported. They wanted to show that, yes, this young guy, Malvo, pulled the trigger, but did not intend to hurt the victims.
Okay.
So the defense, it was an insanity defense, that he was brainwashed and didn't really understand the consequences. He didn't know right from wrong.
But isn't that
when he pulled the trigger?
Isn't that just and I don't want to get into semantics, but isn't that just an ideology? Isn't that not brainwashing so much as someone cutting them off from other bits of news and other bits of other points of view, and then finally sort of railroading them into, now you're going to start pulling a trigger? Isn't that not so much brainwashing as it is simply instilling this person with an ideology? Or do you think...
I think you're right. And the kid was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. I believe that this whole brainwashing defense was, again, not well supported. The jury really didn't buy it. And I might have agreed with that. I can't imagine the evidence being strong enough to show that this kid didn't understand the consequences of his actions.
Right.
And, again, while these are specific isolated cases, I think more generally we have these brainwashing scenarios in our current sociopolitical system with various movements, very controversial movements, but various movements in our social system that shows that with some tweaking of information available online, people do adopt new beliefs, very brand new beliefs and ideas that they didn't hold before.
Yeah.
So it's again, this idea of the gradation of this, a continuum of brainwashing absolutely exists. Why don't we see those very extreme examples like Bucky? Well, we simply don't, that's not necessarily happening in that way. We don't have these high tech approaches and the ability to do things like implant chips and remove parts of brains and things like that in an ethical way. But I'd say that we have enough examples to show that we should better understand this, and that Bucky's portrayal is important in its test for us around, are we willing to forgive him and give him a second chance, which Captain America is absolutely willing to do.
Yeah. So in the end here, Drea, what side? I think I'm hearing that you're on Team Cap forever, but you are struggling a little bit. You do understand.
Oh boy, it was hard to continue to defend all of Cap's actions in this film. I will say that I really wanted him to be right, but he towed the line. And I think you're right. It really turned the corner and became centered on protecting and redeeming Bucky.
Yeah.
When there's a bigger problem happening, the chasm among the Avengers, the deep and problematic differences among them that require some better resolution. And at the end of the film, we don't really get that. We see the brutal fight between or among Captain America, Bucky, and Iron Man. And it is absolutely
Unfair.
vicious.
It is unfair.
Why do you say it's unfair?
I mean, you've got, so you have a man in armor, admittedly, very powerful armor. And then you got a guy who on one side has basically been...
You have two super soldiers.
You've got a super soldier on one side. You've got a super soldier on another side with a metal arm that is quite scary. And then there's just this one lingering shot where you keep seeing Tony down on his knees doing everything he can to not even be on the offensive, just defend himself from two guys who are bouncing the shield back and forth to one another and pounding the hell out of Iron Man. And then there's a moment where Cap is literally just on top of Iron Man, punching him. I mean, it goes beyond a simple ideal and it becomes cringeworthy. So much so that our good friend David Nett, who you mentioned at the top of the show as having lent you the Civil War comics, said that, and this is a guy who will all day, every day defend Cap. He is Team Cap all the way, except when it comes to this movie. He really doesn't think Cap has much of a leg to stand on in this film. And even I think the smart analysis that he gave us was in the comics, the fissure was simply something that couldn't be closed. That was a gap that was so far between Tony and Cap that it just, there was just no fixing it. This was going to happen. This war was going to happen. And in the film, this is easily solved with a conversation. And it's a conversation that never happened. And therefore we went overboard with all this craziness. I'll say this. Zemo was brilliant and might be one of my favorite villains in the entire MCU. Wow. because Zemo, he's a man who, like you said, doesn't just want a suit. He doesn't want an arc reactor. He doesn't want an infinity gem. He doesn't want any of these gadgets. He's simply a dude who knows for a fact he can't win in a fight with the Avengers. So he does everything he can to make them fight themselves. And he understands that with psychology, I can have them destroy one another. And that, to me, that's the Hannibal Lecter of it. You know, Hannibal Lecter was never a scary villain post Silence of the Lambs, because post Silence of the Lambs, he's just a guy who has a scalpel and he's just slicing people and then eating them or whatever.
Like cooking up their brains.
Right. That's not scary, though. What's terrifying is the man in Silence of the Lambs who gets another inmate to swallow his own tongue from down the hall just by talking to him. That is terrifying. And that's what Zemo has just done. Knowing what could take this fracture and turn it into a full-blown break and executing it so brilliantly puts Zemo at the top of my list of villains in the MCU. He's a man who knows his limitations and decides to conquer them a different way. He says an empire that is defeated by its enemy can rise again, but an empire that is defeated from within will never, will just crumble. And he's not talking about the United States of America. He's not talking about the UN. He is specifically talking about the empire that is the Avengers. And I applaud.
And nothing is more, I guess, fear-inducing than some element of truth in what the villain is saying. That he's right in the sense that these are superheroes. They're superhuman with the ability to overcome just about everybody.
Yeah.
And that kind of unleashed power should be feared in some way.
Yeah.
And what I'll say about the movie generally broadly is that because it takes a turn from the formulas that have been used before. Now, look, we've seen a lot of these movies multiple times now for the show. This movie stood out. I loved seeing look, you've got the essential moment, the face-off between both sides of the Avengers, to see Ant-Man and Spider-Man face off, to see even Scarlet Witch and Vision. You see all of these characters, and yes, maybe some are pulling their punches, but you see them face off with one another, and it's ultimately the question that comic book readers ask all the time: who would win in this fight? How would this character battle this character? And you see this giant battle, and it's very fulfilling in some ways. But there's more to this movie. That I think is the icing on the cake. But there's plenty of interactions. There are these interpersonal moments between characters, especially between Cap and Tony, that really pulls at our moral compass. It really asks us to think about and consider, what would we do in this situation when these would be our friends? How would we handle these conflicts? What side would we be on? What would we do to protect the people close to us? And then some of these characters say, this is my family, and what would I do to ensure that these bonds stay alive?
Well, that depends. If your family member is a serial killer, maybe don't go to any ends
Captain
to protect
America
that
answers
person.
this question. And I will say, some things that I've forgotten about happened in this movie. The introduction of Spider-Man, the recruitment, the parental Tony Stark, Peter Parker.
That's a
element.
relationship that I look forward to watching going forward.
Yes. Second, the introduction of T'Challa and Black Panther, and seeing this character begin to take on leadership.
Well, and he is the one of all of them that's the most mature, because while Cap and Tony are consumed by vengeance the way that Zemo expected them to be, T'Challa was sort of a victim of circumstance, right? T'Chaka, his father, was killed in the attack that Bucky was framed for, and Zemo even apologizes for that. He's like, "Look, I'm sorry about your father. He seemed like a good guy. Like I have no beef with them. You have to understand he was a casualty of what I needed to have happen."
And we should mention that Zemo puts a gun to his face and attempts suicide.
Yeah.
And T'Challa
stops him.
He prevents him from doing that. He does say that there are some consequences that are ahead of him, and that he needs to be alive for that. But that moment, I think, was very telling of T'Challa as a character. I'm not going to let you take your own life. There will be consequences for you, but this is not the way to do it.
Yeah, and T'Challa even says that while they're consumed by vengeance, he's not going to allow himself to be consumed by it any further. And he puts it down. His need for revenge is over, and he shows a maturity and a restraint that is significant compared to the other guys who are currently beating each other senseless just 20 feet away.
And lastly, I'd say, again, the relational highlights for me, lastly, would be the emerging connection between Wanda and Vision. One where Wanda is still mending from the loss of her brother, working through this idea that she is seen as a monster, and finding solace and it's not clear yet here, but finding a little bit of connection and bond with Vision. And Vision, who is self-competent, who has pretty much just seen himself as a mechanism or a tool built by Tony Stark, is realizing that the sophistication of his design allows for empathy and connection. And what about protecting this woman? What about being close to her? Like, what is that building within him? And to see that emerge is really, also pretty satisfying. So this has its big elements, but also has these relational moments that I think are really meaningful. And I don't know, I really do like this film. I think it's worth a rewatch.
I'm looking forward to seeing this relationship between Wanda and Vision grow, because I'm one of those people who never saw it. I saw them try to force it on us. Like, if I remember correctly, and I can't remember exactly what movie it is, they're going to go from like occasionally talking to like suddenly talking about going off.
Oh, they're full on banging in like between this movie and the next one.
And I don't know why. like where did it happen? When did it happen? Am I supposed? Because even in this movie, he has a very gentle touch with her, but he is still holding her captive. He is still trying to, she is like, no, sorry, I'm going to cripple you, basically. She brings him to his knees,
destroys
and then sends him 10 floors down through concrete.
Right.
I don't see the love connection that everyone's talking about. I do see a dude who is distracted by another person, but I don't necessarily see her equally distracted by him yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this relationship grows to the massive scale of mental destruction that we see in WandaVision, because so far I'm not seeing it, and I don't know that I ever did, even though I knew that in the comics they got together.
Right.
It just seemed like something they kind of just threw at us and forced on us. So I am looking forward to seeing more of that. Next week, though, we're jumping ship a little bit. We're not going to go straight into the next movie in phase 3, which would have been Doctor Strange. We're actually going to go forward, because we're going to cover Black Widow. Black Widow would have taken place right now in the MCU. So we are going to cover Black Widow coming straight out of Civil War, because that will help us set up relationships and other things, and what was Black Widow doing during the time between Civil War and the next series of movies where she shows up. So we're going to cover Black Widow next. But before we go, I do feel like there's an email that we should address. We get a number of emails each week from listeners, and we want to thank each and every one of you who have written to us. Most of them we simply reply to ourselves via email, but this time, Drea, I know you especially wanted to have this one read, and I hope that Dave is okay with it. But he says, "Hello, guys. My name is Dave. I'm a British Royal Marines commando, and like you, I feel like I have gotten into the job that I do because of the influence of Batman and the series as a kid. I have listened to a lot of your podcasts, and I'm slowly working my way through it, enjoying every second. It's both educational and just really awesome." Thanks, Dave. "I have spent time talking to my friends about different mental illnesses that I have learned about from the show. I was wondering if at some point in the future you would consider doing the same concept, but with the Arrowverse shows. So those DC shows that started with Arrow. Think it would be really interesting, as I feel there are a lot of trauma and psychology you could get your teeth into. Many thanks, Dave." And we want to thank you, Dave. Drea, what were your thoughts? For starters, I know asking you to watch a show with a salmon ladder every week.
Oh, I did watch the first season of Arrow, and it's great. There are a lot of salmon ladder.
It's when he stops doing the salmon ladder that you're like,
a lot of salmon ladder scenes. I don't know if we would ever get to it. I can't promise we would. but I would see it as a completely appropriate thing to cover on a show like this. So I won't discount it. But I do want to thank Dave for the message and for mentioning the linkage between the superhero stories and his own story. I always find that to be very inspirational and helpful to hear. So thanks for the note.
Yep. Thank you. Drea, why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you online?
They can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, or on social media at the handle at Arkham Asylum Doc on Twitter and Instagram.
You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. On Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. You can email us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook. And of course, you can come find us on Patreon. Lots of cool stuff coming, including our unboxing and review of Hallmark's To the Batcave holiday ornament, which we just put online for our patrons a day or so ago. So go join our Patreon for that. It's only $1 to see our reactions to this amazing ornament. Might be my favorite ornament ever.
And for everybody, there's just a few more days until 2022. So if you're listening to this over the holiday break, please take good care of yourself. Do what you need to do to stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, do keep in mind that while many of us are loving the holidays, there are those who don't. So it's important that you take care of yourselves and take care of those around you who may be feeling differently.
And we are here for you and will continue to be here for you for the weeks to come.
Yep. So until 2022, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
Gotta say, that's awesome.
I don't know if you've been in a fight before, but there's usually not this much talking.
All right, sorry, my bad.